Molding adds richness to the interior of the home. Your installation is the key to the look of that interior for generations to come, long after you've cut your last cope. So before we put the molding up, we want to inspect it to make sure it's worth putting up. So we want to make sure that the profile is correct, make sure it's what the architect ordered, what the homeowner wants, make sure you know which side of the crown goes up. Then we want to make sure that it's the correct size and it's consistent in size, okay? If you ordered 5.5-inch base, whatever, make sure that's what you got. Get a set of dial calipers. Measure the molding, measure a bunch of pieces, make sure they don't vary by more than a 15,000ths from piece to piece. That's about a 64th of an inch. If we vary by more than that, we're going to have trouble coping, mitering, scarf joints. Everything's going to be a lot more difficult. You want to check to make sure that the molding isn't cupped severely. The more cup it is, the harder it's going to be for you to put up. With crown molding, we want to check the bedding angles. We want to make sure that this forms 90 degrees or it's over 90, so we have a little clearance here, so we're going to hit on the points of the molding, not on the back. Then we want to make sure that the quality is decent, that we don't have a lot of chatter marks or nicks in the knife, which are going to give us raised sections, or chips or snipes on the boards. Make sure that the quality is good, so once it's painted or stained, it's going to look nice. You want to have yourself a moisture meter. Check the wood when it comes in, make sure it's right for your area of the country. Once you know the wood has the right moisture content in it, we want to keep it that way, or it needs to acclimate to the house. When we acclimate the lumber to the house, we want to make sure that it's to the conditions that the customer is going to be living in when they're in the house. So if it's the summertime, the air conditioning should be on. We're shooting for a 35 to 45% relative humidity at 65, 72 degrees, whatever it is, because it doesn't make any sense to acclimate the wood without the air conditioning on and then turn it on and have the wood shrink on us. Okay, so take care of the lumber once you get it. It's your responsibility. If any of these things aren't right, if the moisture's bad, it's too high, way too low, you have bad finish, send the molding back. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about the miter saw cut here, and this is especially important for crown molding because our miter cut generates our cope line for our template. And since every piece comes out exactly like our template, it's critical that our template's correct. So it's critical that our miter saw cut's correct. So when we start with a piece of molding that we're going to select for our template, again, we want to make sure that it's flat, nice and flat, no cup whatsoever, and that it doesn't have any twist to it. Check for twist. You want to put it on a flat surface and rock opposite corners, and you can see that this board has a significant amount of twist to it. And if you notice, now I'm standing it up on the wall, so this is our ceiling projection. And if I take this little block and set it here, you can see that that's what the ceiling projection is at this end. But if I slide it down here, you can see that this end is way off. Because this board is twisted, we really can't use this to check our ceiling projection. And that's what we need to check so we can set our miter saw stop up. So what I'm going to do is take my framing square here, set the crown molding in position the way it's going to set on the wall and the ceiling, and measure my ceiling projection. And here I have 3 1/8 inches. You can also check your ceiling projection by putting the molding on a flat surface, having it set in position, and measure up to get your ceiling projection. So once we have it, then we can take that measurement and rip a piece of plywood to 3 1/8 inches. Now, I like to set my stop for my miter saw, cutting my molding in position, with this block, because I can drop this block up against my fence, put my stop block up against it, and screw it or clamp it in place. You can use a big long piece that goes across your extension wings. This way you can cut on either side of the blade. And now we know that our stop block is 3 1/8 inches away from our fence and parallel to our fence. Now, when we drop our crown molding in position, upside down and backwards, we know that the crown molding is being held 3 1/8 inches away from the fence. Now, if we cut a 45-degree miter on this, our miter cut is going to be 3 1/8 inches deep. And we can measure that again with our framing square like we did before and see that indeed the cut is 3 1/8 inches deep. Now, this is a perfect miter cut for this molding, and when we cope along this line, our cope is going to be 3 1/8 inches deep. And that only makes sense now. This cope is 3 1/8 inches deep, and this cope will fit every single time, providing the first piece we put up that's square cut is 3 1/8 inches out from the ceiling. Because this cope is 3 1/8 inches deep, it's going to go in and fit with this perfect every single time. Now, the best way to get this piece that's to set 3 1/8 inches out from the ceiling is with a coped piece that you know is correct. Because if we take a coped piece and fit it into this, the cope is going to hold this 3 1/8 inches out because that's how deep the cope is. Okay? An alternative to that is to use a gauge, another gauge block. Dave Collins of the Collins Coping Foot made this one up. And this one has the wall and the ceiling projection cut in it. And this will hold the molding at the right wall and ceiling projection for you as you slide it up. This is especially useful for outside miters, where you cut your molding in position on the saw 3 1/8 inches out, cut your miter. When you go to install it, you want to make sure you install it in the same position you cut it at. So here, this gauge block will help you install it at the 3 1/8 inches. It's going to slide up and hit the wall and the ceiling, and you're not being affected by the sheetrock corner. This other gauge block that we use to set our fence on our miter saw, our stop, if you notice, I glued a piece of the crown molding that this was made for on in position, and I lopped off the corner. So you can take this as a gauge block and slide this up the wall until it hits the ceiling, and then you can mark the top and the bottom, and that's where the crown should sit when you go to install it. We're not being affected by the corner, so even if the ceiling's going uphill, this will slide up until it hits the ceiling, or if it's downhill, it's going to hold the crown in the proper position that it's going to be in when you install it. The best way I like those with a coped piece, because if you take a 2-foot coped piece and a 2-foot square cut piece and fit them in the corner, you know, and mark the bottom, you know that's exactly where every cope that comes off the Copemaster will fit. When working with long lengths on the Copemaster, what I like to do is cut the template short so it doesn't stick out from the vise jaws. Then we can work on this side when we're working the machine and have our long length set on an outfeed roller. On anything longer than, say, 3 feet, I'll put an outfeed roller. For a 16-footer, I'll probably put the roller about 8 feet out, so the molding isn't coming in dipped like this. You want to make sure it comes in and sits flat against both of these tubes. Also, when you're putting the molding in, you want to slide it in, make sure it's parallel to this vise jaw. You don't want to expect the vise jaw to have to straighten out a 16-footer as you tighten it up. So slide it in, use your gauge block, put it in place, lift up on that vise jaw, quarter turn, gauge block goes over here, and you're ready to go. To save time and make money with your Copemaster, you want to do production copes. Have your sawhorses set up next to the machine, pre-miter a bunch of ends for all left copes or all right copes, and then just simply feed them into the machine, set it up with your gauge block, do your cope, take them out, put them on a finished pile. This pile can be delivered to the rooms, or you can simply have a coped pile of material ready to go up. Then all you do is measure, cut, and nail it up. It goes up extremely quick. That's the way to make money with your Copemaster. Let's talk about the magnifying headset that's supplied with the Copemaster for a minute. We have an adjustable headband here for all our different head sizes. We have thumb screws on the side which control the friction for the swivel. And it has about a 10-inch focal length. So what I like to do is put it on, leave it flipped up kind of like a welder's goggle, then bring the object to within about 10 inches or so, because that's the focal length of these, and then flip them down, and then raise or lower it to bring the object into focus. If your one eye is a little stronger than the other, you can shift this on your head side to side a little bit. It will help compensate for that. These things are especially useful when you're making a template or doing any fine adjustments like trying to get the side to side reference really paper thin on that crown molding or baseboard. And if I was 20 years old and designed this machine, these probably wouldn't have come with it. But since I'm over 40, we're shipping these with the machine. If for some reason your molding does not have a nice flat area on which to set the stylus angle, or because the curvature of the molding makes it difficult to find a really good angle, you can take a piece of 1x4 or any flat stock and put it into the work vise in front of the saw blade. Lock the carriage so the blade only goes from side to side, and slowly plunge the blade into the stock. In this way, you have now transferred the blade angle to the stock, and you can now transfer that to the stylus angle. After locking the stylus, it's always a good idea to move the stylus back into place and make sure you've got the right angle. This method works with any piece of stock that is large enough to transfer the blade angle. So when we're making a template, we need to cut the template on the machine. You don't cope the template with the coping saw or jigsaw off the machine. You need to do it on the machine. And the reason why is that the curvature of the saw blade is going to be in the cut if you cut the cope on the machine. And here's a block of wood that I just plunged the saw into from the side so you can see the curvature of the blade. And that's going to be in the end cut when you make your template. And if you notice, the stylus has the same curvature as the saw blade. So it's going to mate up perfectly with that cut. And so when you have this up against your template, it's making full contact with the end grain of your template, not just along the coped edge, so your template will never wear out. Also, you can see by this cut that the thicker the molding is, the more back cut you get on your molding. If the molding is very thin, like the top of a base, just this little bit up here, you're just getting a tiny little bit of undercut. But as the molding gets thicker, you're getting more and more undercut.